Welcome back. In this chapter, we're going to be discussing core concepts in CSS, or at least starting to. The first core concept that you should know about is that browsers apply default styles, but you can override them. So if we consider this simple HTML document here, this is what it would look like standardly in a browser like Chrome. As you can see, the browser has picked out that it wants it to be in a serif font. It wants links to be blue and underlined. It has a certain amount of margin between paragraphs and unordered lists, and so on and so forth. But we can change all of this by overriding those default styles using our own style sheets. So the first factor that needs to be considered when we're applying styles is proximity. So what does proximity mean? Proximity means that if we have two selectors that are equal to one another, and we'll talk about equality of specificity in a little bit, but here we have two identical selectors in two separate rule sets. Generally, you wouldn't see these right after each other in a style sheet, but it might be possible that there are other rule sets in between these. Maybe we forgot that we already assigned a style to anchor elements. So here we have one defining a color of red and one defining a color of blue. When this is the case, when that specificity is equal, the second declaration will override the first one. So the color assigned to all of the anchor elements would be blue. The same thing is true if you had a single declaration block containing these two declarations. Now again, you wouldn't see this very commonly, but there are specific instances where this can be really handy. Now proximity also applies in how your styles are included. So if you had two linked style sheets, here we have one style sheet that's including, let's just say, red anchors, and one that's including blue anchors. In this case, because the blue anchor comes second, it would override the red anchor CSS. It doesn't mean it kills the whole CSS file, but even though those two rules are in two separate style sheets, the blue anchor one is defined second, so the red anchor one is thrown out. The same logic applies in the context of style elements or embedded style sheets. So here we have two different style elements. The first one is defining anchors to be red, the second one defines them to be blue. The first rule gets overwritten by the second one because of proximity. Now here's where it gets a little bit tricky. Here we have a style element and a linked style sheet. And in this case, the style is coming first, and it's got a color of red for anchors, and then the linked style sheet has blue for anchors. Which one do you think would win? Probably not the one you thought. If you think about it, this makes sense. The blue anchor style sheet is an external file. Therefore, it is further away from the element that it's defining styles for. The embedded style sheet is closer in proximity. Even though it comes earlier in the document, it is closer to the element because it's only on this page. Therefore, any declarations applied within a rule set in an embedded style sheet that could override a declaration in a linked style sheet will do so. Now, I mentioned that proximity has an effect when specificity is equal. I kind of dropped that word on you. So what is specificity? Specificity is another factor in style application, and it can be really, really tricky. This will be the thing that trips you up the most in CSS. So consider this simple document. Here we have a body with a div element. Inside the div element, we have an H1, a paragraph, an unordered list with list items in it, and another paragraph. All of this markup forms what's called a DOM tree. So here you can see laid out that the body has a child that is div with an ID of content. The div has four children, an H1, a paragraph, an unordered list, and another paragraph. The first paragraph has an anchor element, and the unordered list has three list items. The first one having a class of first assigned to it, and the last one having a class of last assigned to it. So let's focus on those list items for a moment. If we applied these style rules to the page, li background red, li background blue, what color will the list items turn? Blue. We saw that earlier. Blue would trump red. Now, if we were to adjust the selector of the first rule set to be any list item that is contained within a UL, and we'll get into these different selector types in a later chapter, but if we were to adjust that selector, now we're selecting list items in the context of an unordered list. So this has greater specificity. We have the list items, and they are contained within an unordered list. So what color do you think the list items would turn now? Red. That's because specificity is higher on that first rule set, and the order doesn't matter. It's worth noting, however, that specificity is a double-edged sword. We've set a selector of UL-LI for the color red, but what if all of a sudden we change that list from being an unordered list to being an ordered list? Now what happens to those list items? They turn blue because the selector no longer matches to turn them red. Now let's talk a little bit about debugging proximity and specificity. The first thing to do to avoid issues with specificity is to keep your specificity as low as possible. And we'll talk about the different selector types and the effect they have on specificity momentarily. If you think you might be having a problem with specificity, the bang important keyword can be used to verify that. So if we wanted to see the blue apply across the board, we could add this bang important or exclamation point important to the end of our declaration. And when we do that, that will trump anything having to do with specificity. It says this rule is very, very, very important. Now I should note, you do not want to be using important in your production style sheets. Because once you start making one thing important, if you then have an issue with specificity again, you're going to have to make that declaration important. And then if you want to override that, you have to make another declaration important. And you end up in this ever-escalating arms race of importance. And when everything's important, nothing's important. So use this only for debugging purposes. Don't include it in your style sheets when you actually launch your site. Now, another thing that can help in the world of debugging specificity is dev tools. So here we see the fascinating cuttlefish site, and if I click on inspect element, I can go through and I can see all of the styles that are being applied to a given element. And then I can see actually which ones are being overridden. So here you see I'm selecting based on menu mark A, and then below that we've got one with less specificity, menu A, and you can see that the color is being overridden. Below that, you see another menu LI, comma, menu A, and then below that, nav mark A. All of these are being ranked in order of specificity, and then after specificity being ranked in order of proximity. So this is a really, really helpful diagnostic tool for when you're struggling with why a particular declaration is not being applied to your element. So that wraps it up for this chapter. We've talked about proximity and specificity, and in the next chapter we're going to tuck into two other core concepts within CSS, fault tolerance and inheritance. I'll see you in a few minutes.